The footage still circulates, long after the rain dried and the steps returned to routine. Not because it is shocking, but because it is instructive. It shows how power often announces itself loudly, and how real authority does not. It shows restraint meeting arrogance, patience outlasting intimidation, rules turning back on those who misuse them. The woman never raised her voice. She never threatened. She never needed to. She let the moment unfold exactly as it was, knowing that truth, when recorded, requires no embellishment. The officer did not fall because of public anger or mob judgment. He fell because his own actions, spoken and visible, could not survive scrutiny. Justice arrived without spectacle, without violence, without revenge. It arrived through process. Inside the courthouse, cases continued. Outside, a lesson settled into the public record. Not every abuse of power ends this way. That is why this one matters. It reminds viewers that accountability does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like silence, documentation, and a door closing behind the person who belongs on the bench. For those watching, listening in the background of long days and longer commutes, the takeaway is simple and enduring. Power is loud when it is insecure. Authority is quiet when it is real. Systems fail when no one challenges them. Systems heal when someone does, calmly, within the rules, and in the open. If this story resonated, it is because it reflects a truth many recognize but rarely see resolved. These moments matter. They shape policy. They change behavior. They prevent the next incident before it happens. Stories like this deserve to be seen, remembered, and shared, not for outrage, but for accountability. Because the more light that reaches these moments, the less often they repeat. Policy changes did not arrive with ceremony. They arrived in memos, training schedules, and revised protocols quietly distributed across departments that preferred not to draw attention to why they existed. Courthouse jurisdiction guidelines were updated first, clarifying lines that should never have been blurred. Officers were instructed, explicitly now, to verify identities before escalation on judicial property. The language was firm, unambiguous, written in response to a failure that no one named aloud but everyone understood. Mandatory training sessions followed. Roll call rooms filled with officers watching the footage frame by frame, not as entertainment, not as outrage, but as instruction. The pause before the grip. The dismissal of credentials. The laughter at authority claimed. Trainers stopped the video at critical moments and asked simple questions. What should have happened here? What policy applies? What alternative action existed? Silence answered more clearly than words. The lesson was not abstract. It was specific, visual, and uncomfortable. Supervisors received separate briefings, focused less on individual conduct and more on systemic blind spots. Assumptions were identified. Bias pathways mapped. Escalation triggers examined without euphemism. The message was clear: authority unchecked corrodes credibility. The department framed the changes as proactive improvement, but internally they were understood as correction. The incident had exposed a weakness that could no longer be ignored. Across jurisdictions, court administrators coordinated with police leadership to formalize communication channels. Identification procedures were standardized. Rapid verification systems implemented. Joint training exercises scheduled. These were not concessions. They were safeguards. The judge participated indirectly, reviewing drafts, approving language, insisting on clarity over comfort. Her involvement was procedural, not personal. Reform was not about vindication. It was about prevention. Publicly, the court released a measured statement reaffirming judicial independence and mutual respect between institutions. It acknowledged the incident without dramatization, emphasizing accountability and learning. The tone matched the response throughout: calm, deliberate, corrective. Media coverage shifted from confrontation to consequence. Commentators noted the rarity of visible reform following such encounters. Legal analysts highlighted the restraint that allowed the system to correct itself rather than fracture. Within the courthouse, daily routines resumed unchanged on the surface. Dockets filled. Hearings proceeded. Yet subtle differences emerged. Officers stationed near entrances carried themselves differently, voices lower, posture more attentive. Court staff moved with renewed confidence, knowing procedures now backed them explicitly. The steps outside remained the same stone, but the space felt recalibrated, authority redistributed to where it belonged. The judge continued her work without reference to the past. She did not grant interviews. She did not become a symbol. In chambers, colleagues acknowledged what had occurred with quiet respect. No congratulations were offered. None were needed. The impact spoke through policy, through training, through the absence of repetition. Months later, new officers would learn the case not by name, but by lesson. A scenario presented in training. A question asked. A standard set. The story would be stripped of spectacle and preserved as structure. This is what happens when authority forgets its limits. This is how it is corrected. Reform settled in slowly, invisibly, as it always does when it is real. No banners marked the change. No speeches celebrated it. But the next time an officer stood on those steps, faced with uncertainty, the pause came sooner. The verification happened faster. Escalation did not occur. That absence was the measure of success. The supervisor arrived 20 minutes later, long after the judge had taken her seat inside, long after the courtroom doors had closed and order restored within walls that did not bend to street-level theatrics. By the time the unmarked car pulled to the curb, the rain had slowed again, leaving the steps slick and reflective, preserving the scene like evidence. The crowd had thinned but not vanished. Some stayed out of resolve, others out of instinct, sensing that consequences rarely arrived with sirens, but they always arrived eventually. The patrol officer stood rigid near his cruiser, replaying the moment in fragments he could not reorder. He had already tried once to justify his actions over the radio, choosing words carefully, avoiding the title that had undone him. It hadn't worked. The supervisor stepped out slowly, scanning faces, cameras, uniforms, posture. Experience taught him everything before a word was spoken. He did not ask what happened. He asked who had recordings. Hands rose. Phones lifted again. The answer was obvious. The supervisor asked the patrol officer to step aside. Not loudly. Not publicly. The request itself carried weight. The younger officer followed instinctively, then stopped when the supervisor shook his head. "Just you," he said. The patrol officer obeyed, suddenly aware of how visible obedience looked. They spoke in low tones near the car, but microphones and proximity made secrecy impossible. The supervisor asked if the individual was, in fact, a judge. The patrol officer said he believed she claimed to be. The supervisor corrected him. "She is." The words landed cleanly, without judgment, and stripped away the last refuge of denial. The supervisor requested his badge number and incident timeline. Again. "For the record." The patrol officer complied, voice tight, eyes darting toward the courthouse doors as if expecting them to open again. They did not. Inside, proceedings continued uninterrupted. Outside, the world narrowed to accountability. The supervisor instructed him to return to his cruiser and wait. He did not frame it as discipline. He framed it as procedure. That distinction did not matter. The cameras captured the walk of retreat, slow and unmistakable. Court security moved efficiently now, gathering names of witnesses, requesting copies of footage, noting angles and times. Their professionalism contrasted sharply with the chaos that had preceded it. A court administrator appeared briefly, conferring with security, her expression composed but severe. She nodded once toward the patrol officer, then turned away, already focused on documentation. The system had engaged, quiet and relentless. Inside the courthouse, word traveled fast but softly. Lawyers leaned toward one another. Clerks whispered. The judge took the bench without reference to the delay, without mention of what had happened outside. Her control of the room was immediate, unquestioned. Those present sensed something had occurred, but not its scale. That knowledge would come later. For now, the court moved forward, as it always did, indifferent to egos bruised on the steps. Outside, the supervisor informed the patrol officer that he was being placed on administrative leave pending review. The phrase pending review sounded neutral, almost gentle. Its meaning was not. The officer protested quietly, citing confusion, misunderstanding, lack of clear identification. The supervisor listened without interruption, then said that would all be addressed in the investigation. He reminded him that the incident involved a sitting judge, multiple witnesses, and extensive video. He said it would be handled thoroughly. There was no reassurance in his tone. Only finality. News crews began to arrive as the afternoon wore on, drawn by alerts and uploads spreading faster than official statements ever could. Microphones appeared where phones had been. Questions followed. The supervisor declined comment beyond confirming an incident was under review. Court officials did the same. The silence was strategic, allowing evidence to speak louder than explanation. Online, the footage multiplied, angles converging into a single, unavoidable narrative. The insults. The grip. The laughter. The moment authority shifted and did not return. By evening, the department issued a brief statement acknowledging the encounter and confirming the officer had been relieved of duty pending investigation. It named the judge. It did not name the officer. That omission did not last. Internet detectives filled the gap within hours. Screenshots circulated. Badge numbers matched faces. The story solidified, not as outrage alone, but as documentation. The officer's past conduct surfaced, patterns hinted at, questions asked. None answered yet. The process had only begun. The younger officer submitted his report that night, hands unsteady, words careful. He described what he saw, not what he wished he had done. The court officers did the same. Witnesses emailed footage. The judge reviewed preliminary summaries between cases, her expression unchanged. She made no public statement. She did not need to. The system she represented was already responding, slow, deliberate, unavoidable. Days later, the officer appeared before an internal review board, cameras absent but consequences present. Policies were read aloud. Conduct dissected. Jurisdiction clarified. Training failures identified. The laughter played again, this time without an audience to impress. The board asked why he ignored court security. Why he escalated. Why he mocked a claim he could have verified in seconds. He answered poorly. Arrogance does not translate well under scrutiny. The outcome was not instant, but it was decisive. Suspension without pay became termination. Termination became referral. Referral became mandatory retraining for others. The department announced changes to courthouse protocols, revised guidance on interactions with court officials, renewed emphasis on de-escalation and verification. None of it mentioned her name directly, but everyone knew why it existed. Outside the courthouse, the steps returned to quiet. Rain dried. Life moved on. But the footage remained, archived, cited, taught. A moment that began with an insult ended with reform, not through spectacle or force, but through calm authority meeting unchecked power and holding it to account. The rain seemed to soften in that instant, not stopping, but thinning, as if the city itself were listening. The word judge still hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The patrol officer shifted his stance, a subtle adjustment meant to regain balance that no longer existed. His grip on her arm loosened, fingers opening as if they had touched something hot. He looked at the court officer again, searching for contradiction, for a wink or a correction that would restore order. None came. The court officer repeated the confirmation, slower this time, each syllable careful. Presiding judge. Scheduled session. Waiting courtroom, the younger officer took an involuntary step back. His face changed first, confusion giving way to realization, realization to concern. He glanced at the cruiser, at the cameras, at the crowd that had gone silent all at once. Silence carried more weight than noise ever could. The patrol officer cleared his throat and straightened, reflexively reaching for authority like a lifeline. He said titles didn't excuse behavior. He said no one was above procedure. The words sounded rehearsed, defensive. The judge listened without interrupting, her expression calm, almost distant, as if she were already evaluating the scene from another vantage point. She asked him, evenly, to remove his hand completely. He did. The release was immediate, unmistakable. A small gesture, but the cameras caught it, the moment authority physically let go. She adjusted her jacket, smoothed the sleeve where his fingers had been, and stepped half a pace forward. Not toward the doors yet. Toward him. The movement was subtle, but it reversed the geometry of the scene. Now he was the one standing his ground. She asked him to state his name and badge number for the record. The request was polite, procedural, devastating. He hesitated, then gave it, voice tight, aware that refusal would only deepen the damage. She thanked him and turned slightly, addressing the court officers and the crowd together. She stated that the delay had been caused by a misunderstanding of jurisdiction and conduct. Her tone was measured, professional, stripped of emotion. She did not accuse. She documented. She noted the time. She noted the presence of witnesses. She noted that the encounter had been recorded. Phones lifted higher, if that was possible. The patrol officer watched her, realizing too late that the story was no longer his to tell. She then turned back to him and asked if he intended to continue obstructing her access to the courthouse. The question was framed legally, not personally. It demanded an answer that would live forever on video. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The younger officer looked at him, waiting for instruction that would not come. The court officer stepped closer to the judge's side, not touching her, simply occupying space in quiet solidarity. The crowd held its breath. The patrol officer muttered that she was free to go. The word free sounded wrong, misplaced. She acknowledged it with a nod, not granting forgiveness, not expressing gratitude. She thanked the court officers for their patience and turned toward the doors at last. As she moved, the crowd parted instinctively, creating a clear path. The power shift was complete, visible in posture and silence. She climbed the steps with the same measured calm she had descended them earlier, the building reclaiming her with each step. Halfway up, she stopped and turned back. The pause was intentional. She addressed the patrol officer again, stating that his conduct would be reviewed. She said it without threat, without heat, as a matter of procedure. She instructed the court officer to ensure that all recordings were preserved and that an incident report be initiated immediately. The court officer nodded, already reaching for his radio. The patrol officer's face drained of color. He tried to speak, to explain, to soften what had hardened beyond repair. She raised a hand gently, stopping him. She said there would be time for statements later. Inside the building, doors opened wider now, court staff visible, drawn by the gravity of the moment. The judge entered without looking back again. The doors closed behind her with a soft finality that echoed louder than any slam. Outside, the patrol officer stood in the rain, suddenly exposed. The crowd did not disperse. They watched him, phone steady, capturing the aftermath. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, realizing he had just witnessed a line being crossed and redrawn. The patrol officer keyed his radio, voice strained, requesting a supervisor. This time, the call sounded different. Not confident. Urgent. The rain resumed its steady rhythm, washing over the scene as if to cleanse it, but nothing could erase what had already been recorded. Authority had reversed not through force or volume, but through calm, precision, and the simple truth of who held the seat of judgment. The courthouse clock chimed again, marking the beginning of a session that would proceed, even as the consequences outside began to take shape. The officer's hand remained on her arm longer than necessary, a deliberate pause meant to assert ownership of the moment. He did not move her yet. He wanted the cameras to see who was in control. He announced again that she was being escorted away from a restricted area, even though no such restriction existed. The younger officer echoed the language, repeating it like a line memorized in training. The woman stood still, allowing the grip to be seen clearly. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and steady. She stated that the officer was exceeding his authority. He smirked at the phrasing, as if it were a joke told badly. He said authority didn't come from paperwork or titles, it came from the badge on his chest. The crowd reacted to that, a soft wave of disbelief and anger. Phones adjusted angles, capturing the badge, the grip, the rein. He began to list alleged violations, stacking them carefully: obstruction, failure to comply, disorderly conduct. Each word landed with practiced ease, detached from reality but heavy with consequence. The woman did not interrupt. She allowed him to finish, then corrected one detail, calmly, precisely. He bristled at that. Corrections threatened the narrative. He told her to stop talking. He told her she was making it worse. He shifted his grip, turning her slightly toward the steps, not inside, but sideways, a visual displacement meant to signal removal. The younger officer stepped closer, blocking her other side. The choreography tightened. The crowd pressed in, held back only by an unspoken line of respect for uniforms. A man in a suit called out that she hadn't done anything wrong. The officer snapped back that he didn't need commentary. A woman asked if they could at least let her retrieve her identification. He said no. He said she'd have that chance later. The word later echoed with threat. Rain soaked through the woman's jacket now, darkening the fabric. She adjusted her footing to keep balance on the slick stone. The officer interpreted the movement as resistance and announced it loudly. Resistance. The word traveled fast, changing the temperature of the scene. The younger officer stiffened, readying himself for escalation that still hadn't happened. The woman finally raised her voice just enough to be heard clearly by the crowd. She stated her full name. She stated that she was scheduled to preside over a proceeding beginning in minutes. The officer laughed openly at that, a sharp bark that cut through the rain. He said she should tell that story to a judge. The irony hovered, unnoticed by him. He told her that impersonating an official was a serious offense. The accusation was reckless, careless, and powerful. The crowd reacted audibly now, disbelief turning to outrage. Several voices spoke at once, questioning, protesting. The officer raised his hand again, commanding silence. He said anyone interfering would be removed as well. The younger officer glanced at his partner, uncertainty deepening. He had heard the name the woman spoke. It sounded familiar, but familiarity meant nothing against rank and momentum. He stayed quiet. The first officer leaned closer to the woman, lowering his voice again, making it intimate and threatening. He told her this could end easily if she stopped pretending and started cooperating. He told her pride wasn't worth the trouble. He told her people like her always learned eventually. The words carried weight far beyond the moment, echoing histories the crowd recognized instantly. A hush fell, thick and charged. Court security finally emerged again, drawn by the raised voices. Two officers in different uniforms stepped onto the threshold, scanning the scene. They hesitated, caught between jurisdictions, uncertain where authority lay. The first patrol officer noticed them and raised his voice further, asserting control of the scene before anyone could question it. He told them he had a non-compliant individual detained. The court officers exchanged a look, confusion clear. One of them recognized the woman immediately. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. He started to step forward, then stopped, bound by protocol and the public nature of the confrontation. The woman turned her head just enough to meet the court officer's eyes. No words passed between them, but recognition did. The first patrol officer noticed the exchange and misread it as collusion. His irritation spiked. He told the court officers to stand back. He said this was police business now. He said he had it handled. The court officer opened his mouth, then closed it again, calculating. Cameras captured the moment, the pause heavy with consequence. The crowd sensed a shift, subtle but undeniable. The patrol officer decided to move things along. He announced that the woman was being escorted to the cruiser for processing. Processing for what remained unclear, but clarity was no longer the goal. Control was. He guided her a step forward, then another, away from the doors. The woman complied physically but continued speaking, stating calmly that removing her would halt court proceedings. He ignored that. He told her she should have thought of that earlier. The younger officer stayed close, eyes flicking between faces in the crowd and the woman's expression, now resolute rather than calm. As they moved, a voice from the crowd called her title aloud, loud enough to carry. The word judge cut through the rain like a crack of thunder. The officer froze for half a second, then scoffed again, louder than before, mocking the idea. He said anyone could claim anything. He said he wasn't impressed. But something had changed. The younger officer stiffened visibly. The court officers stepped forward together now, unable to ignore it. One of them spoke the woman's name, clearly, respectfully. The officer turned sharply, anger flaring. He demanded to know why they were interfering. The court officer replied, evenly, that there appeared to be a misunderstanding. The patrol officer bristled at the word misunderstanding. He corrected it immediately, saying there was no misunderstanding, only refusal to comply. He doubled down, voice rising, posture aggressive. He told the court officer to mind his lane. He reminded everyone present who had arrest powers. The court officer responded quietly that authority inside and outside the building was not the same. The statement hung there, dangerous and precise. The crowd leaned in. Phones zoomed closer. Rain continued to fall, relentless and patient. The woman stopped walking. The officer's grip tightened reflexively, then loosened as he realized she had halted deliberately. She turned fully now, facing him, the crowd, the cameras. Her voice carried without strain. She stated again her name and title, clearly, formally. She said she was the presiding judge of the very court behind them. The words landed slowly, one by one, reshaping the air. The officer laughed again, but the sound was thinner this time. He said he'd heard enough stories for one day. He demanded proof. The woman gestured toward the doors, toward the court officers, toward the building itself. The proof was everywhere. The court officer stepped forward and confirmed it. Simply. Calmly. No drama. Just fact. The patrol officer stared at him, then back at the woman. For the first time, uncertainty broke through the certainty. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked around, suddenly aware of the phones, the crowd, the rain-soaked steps. He said nothing for a moment. Then he spoke again, louder, insisting it changed nothing about her behavior. The denial sounded hollow even to him. Authority misuse had reached its peak, fully documented, fully exposed, and now impossible to undo. The officer's radio crackled, filling the brief silence with static and codes that meant nothing to the people watching but everything to him. He turned slightly, angling his body so the woman stood framed between his shoulder and the courthouse steps, a visual suggestion of containment. His voice grew firmer, louder, as if volume itself created legitimacy. He repeated his order for her to sit, to comply, to stop pretending she belonged where she stood. The woman did not raise her voice. She asked again, calmly, that he allow her to pass. Her restraint irritated him more than defiance ever could. He pointed at the ground, a sharp motion, and announced that she was being detained for investigation. The word detained rippled through the crowd, changing curiosity into concern. A man near the curb whispered that this didn't look right. Another lifted his phone higher. The officer began narrating, speaking not to her but to the cameras, to the invisible report he was already writing in his head. He described her as uncooperative, evasive, argumentative. Each label stacked neatly, a familiar structure designed to justify what would come next. She stood still as he spoke about her, not to her. Rain streaked down the brim of his cap. He wiped his face with irritation and told her to turn around. She asked if she was under arrest. He paused, then said she would be if she didn't start listening. The threat was conditional, flexible, useful. Court security officers appeared briefly through the glass doors behind her, then disappeared again, unaware of the gravity building outside. A second patrol car pulled in behind the first, tires hissing on wet pavement. The arrival changed the officer's posture. Backup always did. His confidence solidified, shoulders broadening, tone sharpening. Another uniform stepped out, younger, scanning the scene with quick eyes. The first officer spoke to him quietly, gesturing toward the woman with a dismissive tilt of his head. The younger officer nodded, defaulting to hierarchy without question. Together they formed a loose barrier, a practiced choreography that left her framed as the problem. The crowd shifted closer, drawn by numbers and uniforms. Someone said her name softly, as if they knew it, though no one did. The woman finally opened her folder, slow enough to signal transparency, deliberate enough to remain in control. Inside were papers, neatly arranged, edges aligned. She held them up slightly, not toward the officers but toward the space between them, a gesture of evidence rather than compliance. The first officer barely glanced. He told her paperwork didn't mean anything out here. He said the street wasn't a courtroom. The irony passed unnoticed by him but not by the cameras. She replied that it was courthouse property. The younger officer shifted, uncertain, but said nothing. The first officer cut her off, accusing her of arguing again, of trying to confuse the situation. Rain intensified, drumming against hoods and shoulders, turning the scene into something theatrical and raw. A woman in the crowd asked why they were stopping her. The officer snapped back that this didn't concern her. Another voice asked if there was a supervisor coming. The officer ignored it. He instructed the younger officer to stand closer, tightening the visual pressure. The woman's calm became the most striking thing in the frame. She did not plead. She did not explain beyond what was necessary. She simply stated that she had an obligation inside and that delaying her carried consequences. The first officer laughed at that, a short sound edged with disbelief. He asked if she was threatening him. She said no. She said she was informing him. A court clerk exited the building briefly, holding the door for someone unseen, then stopped when she saw the gathering. Her eyes moved from uniforms to phones to the woman at the center. She hesitated, then retreated inside, uncertainty written across her face. The door closed again, sealing the moment. The officer took that as permission. He told the woman she was now interfering with police activity. He reached for his cuffs but stopped short, letting the threat linger. The younger officer watched her face, searching for fear, finding none. Traffic slowed to a crawl. Drivers stared. The phones captured everything, the rain blurring lights into streaks, the voices cutting through. The officer demanded identification. She said it was inside. He said that wasn't good enough. He accused her of lying. She corrected him once, quietly. That correction landed harder than any insult. His jaw clenched. He stepped closer again, lowering his voice in a way meant to intimidate. He told her people like her always thought rules bent for them. He told her today they didn't. The statement carried an unspoken history, one the crowd recognized immediately. A man near the steps shook his head and said, "Come on." The officer shot him a look and ordered him back. The tension thickened, fed by repetition and refusal. Nothing moved forward, yet everything escalated. The woman asked again to be allowed inside. The officer refused again, louder this time. The younger officer shifted his weight, discomfort visible now, but loyalty held him in place. A supervisor's car did not arrive. The rain soaked through fabric and patience alike. The officer finally announced that he would escort her, not inside, but away from the steps. He took her arm lightly, testing resistance. She did not pull away. She looked at him and said, very clearly, to remove his hand. The crowd inhaled as one. He hesitated, surprised by the certainty in her voice. For a brief moment, control wavered. Then he tightened his grip, choosing momentum over judgment. The escalation was complete. What had begun as a casual insult had become a public standoff, recorded, undeniable, and moments away from turning into something none of them could undo. The courthouse clock chimed faintly inside, unheard by most but marking time all the same. With each passing second, the scene hardened into a shape that would not soften later. The officer's certainty fed on itself, reinforced by routine and the assumption that no real authority stood before him. The woman's silence now felt deliberate, strategic, as if she were allowing the moment to document itself. A few people in the crowd murmured about rights, about procedure, about cameras. The officer dismissed it all with a raised hand, declaring the situation under control. Rainwater pooled at the edge of the steps, reflecting uniforms and faces alike, a distorted mirror of power. The younger officer swallowed and glanced toward the doors. Waiting for something to change. It began on a wet afternoon outside a downtown courthouse, where the stone steps held the cold and the air smelled of rain and metal. A patrol car idled at the curb, engine humming like a warning no one had asked for. A uniformed officer leaned against the hood, watching a woman descend the steps with measured calm. She carried a leather folder, walked without hurry, and held her shoulders square, as if the building behind her still belonged to her. She did not notice the phone recording from across the street, or the second cruiser slowing nearby. The pushed away from the hood and stepped into her path. His voice cut through the street, sharp, practiced, certain of obedience. He asked where she thought she was going, why she was ignoring him, why she did not show respect. The words were casual insults, delivered with routine ease. He called her confused. He called her lost. He told her to step aside and wait. The folder pressed tighter against her chest. She stopped, finally, and met his eyes. Her face showed restraint, not fear. She spoke softly, naming the courthouse, the time, and her purpose. It only annoyed him. He laughed, short and dismissive, and looked around as if inviting witnesses. A passerby slowed. Another phone rose. The officer stepped closer, invading space, reminding her who controlled the sidewalk. He told her she was obstructing, told her to watch her tone, told her she should be grateful he was being patient. His hand hovered near his belt. The moment tightened, stretched, and drew attention like a held breath. She glanced past him, toward the courthouse doors, then back. Her reply was brief. She said she would not step aside. She said she had authority to proceed. The word authority landed wrong. The officer's expression changed, amusement turning sharp. He asked her to repeat herself. She did, evenly. He scoffed and asked for credentials, already convinced they would amuse him. She did not reach for a badge. She did not raise her voice. She told him they were inside. He waved that away and spoke louder, narrating her supposed non-compliance. A small crowd gathered, drawn by tone and posture. Rain began again, light and persistent, dotting uniforms and shoulders. The camera across the street captured everything, including her stillness, including his impatience, including the moment he decided to escalate. He reached for his radio, announcing obstruction, asking for backup with a confidence built on assumption. He ordered her to sit on the steps. She declined. The word no landed clean and final. A murmur moved through the crowd. The officer's jaw tightened. He told her she was making this difficult. He told her she would regret it. The threat stayed just legal enough to sound ordinary. She looked past him again, toward the doors, where court officers moved inside, unaware. Her breathing remained steady. She asked him to move. He laughed again, louder, and said he would decide that. The rain darkened the stone. A siren sounded somewhere, distant. The officer shifted his stance, squaring up for an audience. He called her disrespectful, questioned her understanding, and suggested she learn her place. The insult hung there, quiet and heavy. A woman in the crowd shook her head. Someone whispered. The camera did not move. The officer took a step closer, ready to turn routine power into spectacle. She finally shifted, not back, but forward. She told him he was delaying a proceeding. She said the court was waiting. He smiled, certain he controlled time. The rain kept falling, patient. No one yet understood what authority meant, or how completely it would change the scene. The officer gestured toward the steps, repeating his order. The crowd leaned in. Phones recorded. Traffic slowed. The woman adjusted the folder under her arm, eyes steady, voice calm. She said nothing more. The moment stretched to its limit, a quiet line before consequence. The courthouse doors loomed behind her, closed, silent, waiting. The officer stood certain, practiced, wrong. The city listened. The camera held. What came next would not be loud, but it would be irreversible, beginning with a single step forward, taken in silence.